My name is Jessica Norwood, and I'm inspired to give I Believe in You money to folks that dare to dream bigger for themselves and communities. This is the kind of investment that signals love in action. Join me each episode as I talk to wisdom keepers, philanthropists, other investors, and entrepreneurs about investing in an economy that loves Black people. This is Believe in You money. It's really good to have you here, Amaka. Thank you so much. This is a special series that I am doing around Believe in You Money. And you've heard a little bit about Believe in You Money from me before. But it really is this quality of resource that we put out to one another that shows that you care, that you believe, and it opens up imagination, creativity, and all kinds of stuff, particularly for Black and brown communities. And this is this conversation that I've been hoping to have with friends like you to talk about what Believe in You money is from your perspective and how we get more of it out in the world. So thank you so much for joining this conversation.
No, thank you for having me. It's a beautiful setting. I love chopping it up with you. So let's, kiki a little bit.
Yay, perfect. So I want to set this up for everybody because people don't know how we know one another. And we were in a fellowship together. I know I was in a lot of fellowships, so you cannot locate which one I was in, but we were surprised. We were in a fellowship together, and there was this assignment. And tell me if you can remember the details of this assignment.
Yes, the details of the assignment, as I remember, was a scenario of, let's say someone were to give you $100 million. How would you invest it? What would you do with it? And so we were tasked with designing a project that really focused in on what would we do with $100 million. Do you want me to talk about how you responded to this assignment?
Yes, you could tell.
All right. Well, as the fellowest fellow, as we call you, Jessica,
right.
You were very clear. I'm done about imagining the what if. I already know what I would do with it. And so if this project is just to kind of go through the exercise and the motion, well, our people have been doing that. And so why would I just go through the exercise and the motion for it again, unless there's some money on the table? And so there was almost a question, I don't know that you had phrased it like this back then, but where is the Believe in You money? I'm already in the fellowship. Do you believe in me?
Yeah.
And will you put the money up for it? And so, but I also say we had fun. We sang some Cardi B, some Bodak Yellow, and that was fun.
Did. Yes.
And yeah, a lot of good things came out of that fellowship still.
Well, one of the best things that came out of the fellowship is you took the project much more seriously than I did. You're right. I was kicking over tables like, where is the $100 million? But you took that idea and you really ran with it at this point, and now it actually has materialized into what is now Kataly Foundation and Restorative Economies Fund, right? Yeah. Which is pretty exciting. So tell me a little bit about restorative economies, because I hear the word restorative economies a lot, and to think about it from a fund place, and obviously I get a chance to participate in the fund, so I have my crib sheet. I know a lot more about it than most folks, but what is it and why do we need it?
Yeah. So in its simplest form, restorative economics is a framework that I designed to guide my consulting practice. I had been working in social justice work, I had done policy, electoral organizing, community organizing, and had come to find out that at every turn, when we're trying to organize Black and brown people to exercise their power, there's this invisible role that money is playing. And because we haven't had access to the capital, to the resources before, we're not necessarily clear how lobbyists are paying, putting money into elected officials' political campaigns, or how political action committees are being invested in. And so all that to say, for me, the ability to actually understand what is the role that money can play in helping us to get free and helping us to be a liberated people was why I decided to create a framework to help guide me in the work that I was doing. And so the essential equation of the framework is we support community-owned plus community-governed projects that are rooted in building the political, economic, and cultural power of Black, Indigenous, and all communities of color so that we can have self-determination, sovereignty, and we can have sacred, safe space to heal. And part of the reason those tenets are really important to me is that in my organizing work, I have found that we oftentimes tell Black and brown people to be appeased by the social benefits or the services that may be provided in their communities, particularly through economic development. But what's happening when a community is being promised X number of jobs or improvement to their microgrid energy system, they're not necessarily being the owners of these systems. They don't have control, they can't maintain them. And so what we do know is that the developers, the private developers who kind of invested in that project, who are giving X number of jobs, are also reaping great financial returns. And so how can we seek to support projects so that those that stand to be most impacted by them are also those that financially benefit from them, those that control them, because we know when our communities have to maintain our drinking water systems, for example, we're going to take care of our folks. And within that understanding that the exercise is to figure out how do we come together to make decisions together that really center how our entire community can be better off as a whole, as opposed to just those that are loudest and are able to make their voices heard. And so really starting to complicate how we understand democracy so that it goes beyond just one person, one vote, and is deeply rooted in the stewardship of a community. How do we come together and be in relationship with one another and care for one another? And so that is some of the simplest ways I can lay out the framework. It's not that simple. I talked a lot. But all that to say, we then brought the framework to designing an integrated capital fund. And so how can we use the resources of the Restorative Economies Fund to invest in projects that are community owned and community governed? And so we seek to support projects that we identify as the anchors for community wealth building. So community governed loan funds like Runway, really thinking through how to have financial systems that support communities, thinking through equitable economic development projects and land and housing stabilization initiatives, those projects that really help to support people, that really help to support people in creating a thriving livelihood for themselves and each other. And so that's how I created the framework that's now become the fund that was very much informed by this exercise of, if you had $100 million, what would you do? And I was like, oh, this is how I would redistribute it to support communities.
So what I really love about when you talk about restorative economies is these sort of core points about community governed, community ownership, and what it means to belong and relationship, and the distribution of power inside of that. And there was this moment where, right as the pandemic really begins, where everything in the United States just opens up on these questions of ownership and governance and belonging and relationship. And it really boils down into the murder that we watch all happening. And I think about that particular moment of George Floyd and the fake $20 bill and going into a corner bodega, and the impact that is an economic story that really starts to run underneath that point. And I think about how restorative economies even starts to speak to what it means to be engaged in ownership in a community, so that there are other mechanisms that start to work outside of just call the police or something like that, because there's more relationship there. And I remember being at the height of this moment, and I think I want to say we might have been on the same phone call for the Center for Economic Democracies, where we're the Grace Lee Boggs piece is being lifted up of what time is it on the world clock. And in that moment, I think frustrated about all of the things happening at that moment in time, I think I said something around, what would it look like if the economy loved Black people? Like, that was my response to what the moment in time is, that it's time to actually look at the way that we have built our financial system with a level of disposability, so much so that this happens when there's an imagination of a fraudulent $20 bill, and that what we're upholding is not the life of the people or their ability to get the resources that they need, but the actual corporation or whatever goods and services that needs to be quote unquote protected by the police at that point. And so this question of what does it look like if the economy loves Black people starts to move through our friend group, at least. And it's a question I want to ask you. to think about and hold with me, what would that look like from your point of view if this economy, this financial system loved Black people?
Yeah. I've always appreciated when you pointed this question to us. And part of the reason it really resonates with me is so much of the framework, what's at the core of it is very much rooted in healing and rooted in a recognition that those communities that have been extracted from, exploited, excluded, must be reinvested in, must be made whole, restored, so that they can be a part of the design, the co-creation of what we want our next economy to look like. And so up until this point, we have an economic system that has continued to dismiss, alienate, while continuing to benefit from the fruits, the labors of Black people and brown people. And so when I think about what is an economy that loves Black people, I think it's very much rooted in understanding, could we let go of racism? Could we let go of anti-Blackness that sits at the heart of our financial system and how it's designed, so that we actually can look at, rather than rooting our questions of an economy based on how are we amassing and maximizing profits, are our people living well? Are they feeling as though they can move throughout the world with dignity? Do they feel safe? Are they well fed? Are they clothed? There's some basic questions that we can sit with as a society that I think if we could actually look at answering this question of what does it look like to have an economy that loves Black people, we can all be better off as a whole. One of the things I reflect on in the framework is this concept of governing for the whole. And in this concept of governing for the whole, at the center, the invitation is to think about who stands to be most directly impacted by this project. So if we were to take your invitation of what does it look like to have an economy that loves Black people, we could put Black people at the center of that concentric circle. And then the understanding is when we make decisions that center the needs and interests and voices of Black people, of that community that's at the center, we then end up making decisions that are better off for their friends, their family, their neighbors, their loved ones, a society as a whole. But the nexus of anti-Blackness, the way that it has been perpetuated in our capitalist system, is part of what we have to wrestle with. That being said, I also think that the invitation is not just for how do we have an economy that loves Black people, but how can we as Black people create an economy that reflects our likeness, that upholds our dignity, that speaks to the ways that we work, love, play, and be with one another. And I do think our people have continued to do this. We've done this on the fringes of our economy. We've done this in the ways that we watch each other's children, braid each other's hair, start our susus. So we have so much of it already there. Can we give ourselves permission, the radical imagination as you talk about it, to figure out how we take the core values and practices that we use informally when we're just kind of being with one another, and actually formalize them and use them to actually become the underpinning for this economy that loves Black people. And by loving Black people, loves all of us. But it's a great question to meditate on, and I always appreciate the invitation you bring. I always think it's interesting, people have gone and made different permutations of this invitation, because it really does force us all to think, and in thinking it also forces us to take accountability and responsibility in building that economy. And so thanks for always provoking.
Thank you for such a really thoughtful response. I've been, as the people are sharing their responses more intimately in relation to the work around Believing You Money right now, I'm getting to hear other reflections about it, even as time has gone on since I originally, ask it in frustration, ask it in love, and so forth. And I love the way that it shows up as a question around, one, sort of policies, principles, procedures. Like some people go straight into it would be a term sheet that says, and others really lean in on the love part. But mostly everybody comes back to the healing and comes to this point that in order to get to that level of love, you've got to acknowledge, you've got to center, you've got to really practice that radical imagination, forgiveness, and letting go of race. letting go of race, right, deep breath.
Yeah.
Which, right, deep breath. I think about the part of our work that it does require that we talk about race and so forth, but there's also just deep imagining about what is beyond this
Yeah.
moment that I really love about the work that you do and that I get to be a part of. And in this part, it makes me think about just the way that you have supported me and supported so many others. And I think it's my own believe in you money story as well. But I'm curious if you have ever gotten any believe in you money, or what it's like to be on the giving out of believing you money end, to see community, to see all these folks really trying to push an idea forward and to be a part of that story of helping them to make that happen. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I can answer both sides of that
Okay.
question. And, going back to, this fellowship program, right? While you were flipping tables and saying, no, I don't want to do it, I was in the corner, like crying, having a little anxiety attack about this presentation I had to do. What I ended up doing was taking the framework and actually talking about how I would design it into an integrated capital fund that was focused on supporting communities in coming together to collectively own and manage assets together. And so that exercise, even though I was in tears and it produced a lot of anxiety, was the thing that helped me to solidify, it could be possible to actually take this framework and think about how it can inform a redistribution of capital to support communities that are really trying to build their economic, political, and cultural power. And so all that to say, I was really fortunate that in 2018, a friend who is now my boss, Regan Pritzker, came to me and invited me to think about, could we then take the framework, create a fund? At the time, the invitation was to really create a fund for $10 million. And when Regan kind of brought the opportunity to her husband, Chris Oland, and her mother, Susan Pritzker, the opportunity grew to a $300 million integrated capital fund. And so the Kataly Foundation, as a spend-out foundation that's founded by Regan, Chris, and Susan, is a radical commitment to redistribute $445 million to support building power of Black, Indigenous, and communities of color, and being able to do that not just through the Restorative Economies Fund, but also through environmental justice, when we come to really understand environmental justice through a deep intersectional lens. And I think, we're sitting here as we're learning about the crisis, the water crisis in Jackson, as we're learning about the floods in Pakistan. And so really looking at the ways that environmental justice is such a deeply intersectional issue, particularly as it impacts Black women. And then we also have our healing justice, our mindfulness and healing justice program area. So having a foundation that's really bringing together these elements of community wealth building, environmental justice, and healing justice was an opportunity where, when the invitation came to me around, could I lead this foundation? Could I work with my my esteemed colleagues? I love our team so much. And could we use the framework specifically for the Restorative Economies Fund? I think while it's not my money, while I have the privilege to steward it, it is my closest example to believe someone believed in a framework that I created, and it's then allowed us to go and support so many great projects across the United States. And so when I think about supporting the partnership that Runway has with the Real People's Fund out of the Bay Area, when I think about the work of Shelterwood Collective in Northern California, where we have people of color, LGBTQ community members coming together to steward acres of land, or the work of Anasa, our dear friend with Historic Claiborne Temple in Memphis, the ability to support projects and support people that are oftentimes not recognized in their own communities, particularly when we have Black women who are leading projects. When I think about the leadership of you, Noni, Anasa, Victoria Jones, like Aisha Ndoro, Nia Ujoma, just like brilliant women who, for all the reasons that we know, are not able to get access into the spaces that would provide them that early believe in you money to build projects that aren't about their own self-interest, but are actually about their community. When Kataly gets to come in and when our colleagues get to go into meetings and actually say, this is a project we deeply believe in. And we deeply believe in it not because we are trying to generate financial returns for our own financial well-being, but we believe in the dignity and humanity of these communities. We believe in their self-determination, and we want to make sure that they have the resources possible to get there. And so by being able to leverage our institutional power and our foundational resources, we hope that we're able to then organize and bring together other donors, investors, and philanthropic institutions to understand what does it mean to support communities in building assets that they own and manage together. What we know is Black and brown communities are taught to earn wages. Wage labor is supposed to be the thing that's supposed to pay your rent, feed your family, put you through school. But the data has shown most people, based on the minimum wage we provide, actually can't live. So they're working multiple jobs. Meanwhile, wealthy families, wealthy people have assets, right? Assets that continue to generate returns for themselves again and again. And so we want to ensure that we support communities in stewarding assets together, not for the financial extraction, but because they need to live. They deserve to live in good quality housing. They deserve to have access to reliable financial institutions that understand their unique needs, because we want them to be able to control their energy grid systems, their internet infrastructure systems, their water infrastructure systems, because unfortunately the public sector is not doing its due diligence by Black and brown communities. And so for us, I would say there's an enormous amount of pride and joy and solidarity that comes from being able to support the organizations and grantees that we get to lift up through the work of the Kataly Foundation.
Love that. Two big takeaways from this. One, while I was busy flipping over tables, you were solidifying, $400+ million investment, believing you money into this fund, and I
was crying too.
You cried your way through it, but you got there, and I was over in the corner like, so note to self, take the assignment seriously, right? And the second thing that I really love about what you share is how you took that belief in you, and then you amplified it and you gave the belief to the other women that you also mentioned. And similarly, I think that's part of why we have all been able to work so well together is recognizing like what it means to sort of not even just sort of pay it forward. It's much deeper than that. I think it is around recognizing the work, recognizing how the resources would be used and what it is and what we're all aiming for, that really everybody has a piece in the puzzle or in this sort of tapestry. And so I think that's different than just a pay it forward. I think it's an investment in the ecosystem, in the infrastructure of what we're all talking about. And I think that is even really brilliant in the way that this Believe in You money continues to flow through other communities. And then, of course, Runway then makes that money available to believe in other folks. And so it goes on and on and on at that way. And I think that's pretty sweet.
Well, I appreciate what you lifted up there in that it is actually what solidarity in practice looks like. And I think the ecosystem of peers and projects that we get to be a part of is a recognition we actually don't have to compete. There actually is enough, and what can be possible when there's collaboration. And we've created space for that deep collaboration that allows each individual project, each individual leader to shine, to stand on their own right, while also recognizing there is actually enough for all of us. And I think that's one of the things that, when I think back to this fellowship, in addition to the project, the relationships that came out of that fellowship. And, you and I oftentimes talk about how anything that must be done must be rooted in community and relationship building. Otherwise, what's the point? What are we actually creating? And so, we get to be a part of an amazing ecosystem, and everybody's kind of doing their best to play their role.
Nwamaka, this is really a delightful conversation. It makes me, I'm smiling from ear to ear, and it makes me think of, what does it feel like to be an investor in Black joy? What is that like, investing in Black joy?
I mean, I kind of want to ask you that question
Oh,
first
well,
because Runway been doing it with the entrepreneurs.
it's true. It's amazing. This is my,
You're like, you're right.
you're right. It's amazing. One of the things that really strikes me about thinking about investing in Black joy, it's just the way that the imagination, the creativity, the resiliency that is really embedded in the joy, embedded in an imagination of what a tomorrow will be, right? And so I think of it as world making, even when you don't think you have the resource, even when you don't think that you have what it takes. My investment is really in an investment in tomorrow. It's an investment in, the children's children coming forward. And the brilliance of that feeling, like to know that you really are thinking ahead and putting what resources you have ahead to others, I think is just, it changes my world for sure. Yeah.
I like that
Yeah.
answer.
Yeah.
I think, it's interesting. I've never put like investor as one of my identifiers after my name, but I'm going to sit with that. But when I think about investing in Black joy, in addition to what you've just laid out, I would say investing in Black joy provides glimpses into world building outside of the white gaze and outside of patriarchy. And so these moments where you get to see the brilliant spark that Black people have when we dare to be free, when we're able to carve out a space where we feel safe, we feel seen, we feel as though we belong, and to put money behind that so that it can flourish and grow, and hopefully not just be that one moment of a spark, right, but really take off, I think it just creates hope, it creates opportunity. You oftentimes invite us to think about space to dream, and it's that moment where you get to actually flicker and dream for a moment. And so I love the ability to support projects that are doing the radical dreaming, that are creating the spaces of Black joy. And the other thing that is just so beautiful is you can get a sense of Black joy from community to community. It don't matter which country our people are from. It don't matter, the language that we use. There's something that is palpable, that's undeniable about a Black joy experience. And so for those that are honored enough to experience it, you can never go back. It makes me think of, Audre Lorde's her poem, her speech on uses of the erotic. And it talks about, particularly from a Black feminist perspective, it talks about once you have experienced something that is so deeply pleasurable, so deeply joyful, you cannot settle for anything less. Anything less just tastes bland on your tongue. And so for me, you get to start to understand the essence of these types of projects because it hits on that aesthetic, that emotion, that thing that makes you come alive. And so I'm always trying to go for what are the projects that really kind of bring forth that element of Black joy.
Oh, there's so many places I would go. Woo.
Let's go there.
Whoa. You know what? I think that piece around the pleasure is just really deeply important because we have centered so much in the trauma of everything, but what does it mean to move from the joy, from the pleasure, and to make that an investment principle even, right? That's why I really want to encourage you to carry the moniker of investor because we have so many people who carry that, but what they carry alongside of that is the not so much the joy, but more of the what can I get for the best price? What can I extract? What can I do without? And not thinking about that brilliance, that imagination, that real pleasure. They're not making deals out of pleasure. They're making deals out of balance sheets. And what does it look like to orient ourselves and to say, no, when I'm looking at this performer, when I'm looking at these documents, I'm sparked with hope and imagination and creativity. And even when I'm writing out what the term sheet would be, I'm thinking of oh, we could do this. What if we could do that? So we need more of that even in the space of investor. And I love to tell people I'm investor Exactly, yes. Because you need to see people who look
That's
like
true.
me and sound like me
That's true.
and bringing that level of value in. So I see you, I mean, you've invested in me and Runway buku times. And so
Okay.
I refer to you that way in the world, so you might as well catch up.
Okay. All right. Now I know. Now I
Right.
know. So to your point about term sheets and pro forma, the fascinating thing is in creating the framework, I really wanted to just sit with, well, what if we actually created a different way of thinking about investments, of moving capital? You know, the history around how our financial system was created, and I think the work that Nicole Hannah-Jones has done to show us is the ways that we think about economy is just equations made up of by people, and particularly made up by white men that reflects their needs and interests. And so we took a chance with the Restorative Economies Fund to figure out, could we actually take the framework and use it for a due diligence tool, a term sheet that reflected this piece around Black joy, right?
Yes.
That reflected what it what it looks like to ensure that communities are able to live and thrive with dignity. And I owe so much gratitude to my colleague, our friend Lynn Hoy, who comes from a traditional banking background, who really took the time to understand the framework, to translate it into a set of investment tools that now allows us to move money along with our values. So the question is not, is it possible? It's, do we actually have the political will? Are people committed to doing the hard and necessary work to figure out how we move money differently so that we are all able to live with dignity and so that we can thrive? If we do believe in interdependence, if we do believe in our collective liberation, then what are we doing?
That's right.
Right? And so yeah, I guess I will call myself investor. Thank you for the invitation.
Sure.
To really rethink, yeah, we can do something that's fundamentally different.
And I think that's a lot of what it is that you're modeling, what Runway models and other institutions that are also, looking at the practices and policies that line up. So it's not just joy for a sentimental thought, if you will, or the way it makes you sort of feel good kind of thing, but it really is putting joy in action and practice. And we have real tools and strategies and frameworks that animate this word of joy in that way. So I think it's really helpful for folks to know that this isn't just a surface idea. This is about really deeply engaging that question around joy, Black joy and pleasure and all of those things. So my last question for you, I should maybe say it's the last one. It could go anywhere in time, but the question I want to ask you is, if there are folks who are interested in investing the way that we invest in Black joy, in pleasure, and all of the words that we have used in love, what do they need to do in order to show up in this moment in time to do this kind of work?
That's a layered question, and it's an important one. And I think the layers start with, what do you need to do internally as an individual, and then what do you need to do externally as a part of this ecosystem. To start with, what do you need to do internally as an individual, I really invite funders and donors that come to Kataly Foundation and want to learn about our work to really sit with, are they prepared to really redistribute resources in a way that centers, again, the joy of Black and brown communities as opposed to their own financial returns. What we tend to hear is that many people are committed to being anti-racist. Many people are committed to supporting poor Black and brown communities. But when they actually have to run the numbers of, would I give more money away, even if it came at the expense of my own wealth accumulation, people have a hard time coming to terms with that. And I understand that that is deeply rooted in the fear of, if we don't have access to money, that we can't be safe. Oftentimes these people that don't have access, that are rooted in this fear, have access to a lot of money, are very safe, particularly when we think about Black and brown communities at the front lines of poverty and injustice and all the things that we know. But first, to get really right with yourself. get really right with yourself if you want to do this work, and don't put it on another person of color to hold your hand, to do the emotional labor. So there's that piece. Get right with yourself before you want to come and do this work. And then the other piece is, we're fortunate enough to have a lot of great projects happening across the country, and I would say around the world. In our conversation, we've talked about a few. We've talked about Historic Claiborne Temple. We've talked about Runway, Real People's Fund. I would invite people to listen and learn from the work that's already happening on the ground. In addition to Runway, we're familiar with the work of Ujima out of Boston, Seed Commons, a national cooperative loan fund. We have Laura Smith's work out of the Appalachia Impact Investment Fund. We have NDN Collective. There are vehicles that Black and Brown communities have created to receive these resources. So first, really sit with, do you need to create a whole new vehicle? Or are there places where you could partner with groups like Cordata Capital, our friends Tiffany and Kate, that could help you place your monies into those funds or into some of those equitable economic development projects. And in the event that for whatever reason you're not able to move your money into those projects, then really understand how can you be in relationship with those that are already doing the work on the ground, those that are rooted in an understanding of political power building, community organizing, because again, the work is not just about the numbers. It is really how are we organizing and building community towards that future vision that we want to hold together. And so if people can spend some time actually doing their own personal work, their own personal healing, so they're not projecting their own money traumas and challenges onto their borrowers or grantees, that would go so far in ensuring that the hopes and promises of what started as the corporate social responsibility field then moved into social impact investing and now is impact investing. And we have our own qualms about those terms, and but all that to say, I think if people spent more time doing their personal work and really wanted to do the ecosystem building work and relationship with folks, we could really advance our field pretty far.
Yeah. I guess the personal work really leads you into the action. If you're invested in that as a part of making and thinking about the systemic change, like you see yourself as a part of that, not just the feel good of I want to be anti-racist part of it, because it goes beyond that piece of work. It really is in how do I actually do the real building, the real, how do I join in imagining and actually put in to practice the things that I've learned and unlearned inside of this moment. So I think it's a really great invitation for folks to take that next step in this work. And, I always think about like the point that people are like, it's too much, it's kind of scary, I don't know if I want to do, do all this. I tend to think the joy part outweighs everything else. That, when they're like, I don't know if I can live without another $100 million, I'm thinking, but Black joy,
Yeah. What's scary is climate change.
Right.
What's scary is a housing crisis. So, we just went through a pandemic. I think, this might go in a whole nother direction. But yes, I do think Black joy hopefully can outweigh the fear if people will lean into it. But
or let the climate change thing happen.
Or here we go.
Or here we go.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So
what a positive way to end this interview with you, Nwamaka.
But we have to pick it back up. So I think, let me ask a question of my dear friend.
Yes.
You've been able to sit in on a number of these conversations with people. You've been doing this work for some years. I'm not going to age you because clearly Black don't crack, and I couldn't if I tried. I'm curious around how you think about the trajectory that you're on with this work, the way where it started from, where you're at now in this process, and where are you hoping to kind of lead us to? How do I continue to follow you?
Oh my goodness. Wow. Thank you for that. So I'm imagining like the next phase of things. First, I'm super grateful to have you, and everything that I've been able to do with Runway is really because of the team of people that are around Runway. I mean, you know, some of the folks that are connected to Runway. It's just a delight to work with them. They are brilliant, and so where we've been able to go with thinking about infrastructure and thinking about building an economy that loves Black people, thinking about this financial innovation, it's been really sweet, and it's been made all the more sweeter because you've been there, and Nina and Conda and Ronnie and just the whole team at Runway, and even folks who are outside, Tiffany, Kate, so forth, that we've talked about. Um, I think the next thing is really just like how we continue to just deepen and do more together. Um, as we start to grow in our practice and in our understanding, I think what we're doing is really setting the table and an invitation for other people to really recognize that this is a viable and real way. It's not impact investment. This is not, social responsible, whatever it is. This is something really different because it is coming from and centered out of Black women's voices. And I think that that is a really important invitation that we're all really making right now. So I see what we're doing here about shining a light and telling more of our story and talking more about what the invitation and opportunity really is means that we're able to open the door and set the table for more and more. So I see that for us. Yeah.
Well, thank you for setting the table. Thank you for allowing me to have a seat at it. And yeah,
I
let's
love
do
you so
it.
much.
I love
Absolutely.
you.
Thank you for being here.
Of course.